All right, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this wonderful April day. Again, for those of you that popped in early, hope you enjoyed our little pre-webinar music dance party to get everyone up and going this morning. We are super excited to have you here today as we talk about academic and career planning connections between social and emotional learning, employability skills, and graduate profiles. Folks, we are going to do a lot of dot connecting this morning. So before we get started, just a reminder to make sure that you are on mute so that we don't have any background noise. If you're having any video issues, you might want to turn your camera off. Although if there aren't any issues, we love seeing your faces. So feel free to keep those on as well. And then just a reminder that we are recording this session so that anyone that can't be here with us live this morning can also view this afterwards, because we always post these sessions online. So my name is Karen Smith. I am from the Department of Public Instruction, working on our career and technical education team. I work primarily with academic and career planning, dual enrollment, and career pathways. It's always my honor to kick off these career readiness community of practice sessions. Today, I am so thrilled to actually be doing some of the presenting along with my very esteemed colleague, Andrea Donegan. So Andrea, if you want to quick introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Andrea Donegan, School Counseling Consultant here at DPI. I've been here for about a year, came out of the field after 26 years being a school counselor at the elementary, the middle school, and intermediate and kindergarten center level, which was interesting. I always point that out. And excited to be here. Some of my passions really are around social emotional learning and workforce readiness. So this is a great place to be, and I'm happy to be here to join all of you in this learning.
Thank you, Andrea. We are super excited to have you here with us too, and to really learn from you and the expertise that you bring. So thanks for joining us. All right, so we always kick off these webinars talking about why career readiness is more important than ever. And you see, our typical bullet points. We always talk about, go back to some of those same talking points. As I was reflecting on today's webinar and really thinking about that space of social emotional learning, there's a couple of other bullet points that started to come to mind that I think we should talk about and probably add on to this list. As I'm sure you're aware, more and more we are hearing about students who just don't think they have a future. For some of them, it might be because of a trauma that they're experiencing in their lives. For others, it's because they simply don't believe that our world is going to exist much longer. And while addressing these mental health issues is complex, exploring future careers could be one way to give students hope. It can help them discover an issue or a problem that they're passionate about, and then empowering them by showing them that they can be part of the solution, and they can do that through various careers. And that by exploring careers, they can also discover strengths and skills that they may not realize that they've had. So we know and we recognize that there are many inherent structures and external factors that students cannot control. But as we think about career readiness, with the help of staff like us, we can be creating, helping students create an empowering career identity as one of the ways that we can help them cope with the barrage of personal and worldwide crises that they're experiencing these days, and gain some kind of control. So, it's another just bullet point that I want us to kind of keep in the back of our mind as we go into today's session. And as always, we're in this together. So we're going to spend some time this morning in a webinar sharing some information with you. Then we're going to move into breakout rooms where we're actually going to prepare to take some action and use what we learned. And then we will always leave you with some ready to use resources. And also, as always, we really want to make sure that this work is connecting to CTE Without Limits. And as I look at the 5 principles here, I think our topic today really, really connects with principle number 1. each learner engages in a cohesive, flexible, and responsive career preparation ecosystem. By connecting some of these dots that we're going to do today, we are helping to build that cohesive, flexible, and responsive career preparation ecosystem. It's looking at that entire system and all the different parts that come together to help support students in their career journey. So let's get you engaged. We're talking about social emotional learning today. So we want to use those SEL practices. One of them is a welcoming activity. And so I want you to think about what knowledge, skills, and dispositions do you hope students will possess upon graduation? So at the end of the road, as we're about to send them out into the world, what knowledge, skills, and dispositions do you hope students will possess? You can either enter your comment in, your answer in by just typing in the website address that you see. It's a bit.ly address for Career Pool, or you can quick take your phone if you happen to have it handy and use the QR code. And I'm going to give everyone a few minutes to do that. And we're going to come back to this and see some of your responses. So we're doing something a little different today. We're not using the chat. We're going to make a word cloud because, we're always, again, trying to mix things up a little bit. So I'll give you just a few seconds here to go to bit.ly/career poll or use the QR code and enter in your response. And Andrea, maybe you can put that bit.ly address in the chat in case, because while everyone's doing this, I'm going to go to our objectives. So keep going.
I already did that.
Oh, you are so wonderful. This is why I love to partner with Andrea. She reads my mind. Awesome. So as you're working on that, I'm going to talk about our objectives, and we're going to go back to it and see what you said. So here's what we're going to work on today. By the end of this session, we hope that you have a better understanding of how you can create a culture of career and future readiness through a portrait of a graduate, often called a graduate profile. You're going to be able to learn how a graduate profile includes social emotional learning, among some other frameworks that we're going to talk about. You're going to explore how social emotional learning is the engine that powers employability skills. You're going to do some practicing of how you can integrate social emotional learning into existing academic and career planning activities and career-based learning experiences. And providing you stay with us to the very end after those breakout sessions, we are going to give you a preview of our career readiness professional development that we have in store for you next year. So those are our objectives today. Now let's go back and let's take a look at our poll and see if this worked. It did. All right. Excellent. So let's see some of the things that are coming up. Critical thinking, tenacity. I love that. Confidence, lifelong learning. I'm seeing a communication skills, problem solving, resiliency, confidence, growth mindset, adaptability, responsibility, another resilience, leadership, independence, soft skills, readiness. These are all great things. And I think this is really going to set the tone for what we're doing today, what we're talking about today. So feel free to continue popping in some of those answers if you'd like. And chances are we will even publish it on our webpage. All right, so now let's dive into the content. And we're going to start by talking about a graduate profile, sometimes called a portrait of a graduate. And for those of you that may not be familiar with that graduate profile, when we talk about a graduate profile, what we mean is a graphic representation, like you're seeing on the screen, that exemplifies the skills, knowledge, and dispositions that students in a district will graduate with in order to succeed in career, community, and lifelong learning. So essentially, it's your future ready competencies. And that's why you're seeing on these graphic representations here a lot of the same things that you just brainstormed in that word cloud, right? These are typical things that we usually see in a district's portrait of a graduate or graduate profile. Now, we could probably spend a whole webinar talking about how you create a portrait of a graduate or graduate profile. We're not going to get into all those nitty-gritty details, but we do have a great resource that we're going to share with you if you're looking to do something like this for your school district. But I do want to say that if you are creating a graduate profile that is high quality and you're doing it with fidelity, it should be led by your career readiness team. You know, so we talk a lot about bringing together a career readiness team in your district. That includes school counselors and CTE teachers and coordinators and special education teachers and other teachers from other academic areas and administrators and students and families and community partners. You know, and there's that whole list, and that's your list that's your team that could really start spearheading the creation or updating of your graduate profile. But it's also important to go then beyond that leadership team that's going to spearhead it and really reach out and get that input from your community so that your portrait of a graduate or graduate profile really reflects your students, your community, and what are those knowledge, skills, and dispositions that you hope for them. Student voice has to be at the center of creating a graduate profile. Equity needs to be at the center of creating a graduate profile. So I wanted to take, just a few moments to talk about some of those pieces, but right now we're really just looking at that idea of a portrait of a graduate or graduate profile in general. So let's take a look at some of the things that you're seeing on the slide. We're also seeing communication skills. I'm seeing critical thinking and problem solving abilities. I'm seeing, some cultural competence, creativity, self-knowledge, self-starter, responsibility. So a lot of the same things that came up in our word cloud also tend to come up in this portrait of a graduate or graduate profile. And it just so happens that if you were to talk to employers and ask them, what do you really need from your future employees? They're going to tell you the same thing. So this graph really represents about 15 different studies or reports that were done reflecting the skills that employers say that they're going to need the most, and then ranks them. And you can see at the top, communication skills, there it is again, those self-management, responsibility, goal setting, teamwork and collaboration, problem solving, critical thinking, all the things we talked about also happen to be what employers need. So you see how all of this starts to kind of swirl together within that context of a graduate profile. And so as we start to break down all those knowledge, skills, and dispositions that we've been talking about, we can find them within the frameworks of social emotional learning. We also have digital literacy competencies for the state of Wisconsin, so that is a part of this. There's STEM literacy, there's civic engagement, and there's global or cultural competencies. So if you take those frameworks, those all work together to build all those knowledge, skills, and dispositions that we were talking about. These are your builders of your future ready skills. We're going to focus primarily on social emotional learning today, but I just wanted you to set the context by connecting all those dots. And what was super interesting as we started to dive into some of these frameworks that we have in Wisconsin, and we talk about to educators all the time, but usually we talk to them about these individual frameworks. We don't talk about them all together. So as we started to look at them together, we did some crosswalks and looked at how do these knowledge, skills, and dispositions show up in those different frameworks. And you can see there's a lot of coherence. There's a lot of replication, duplication, or you could look at it as really places and spaces where we're strengthening those knowledge, skills, and dispositions. This is an example of collaboration. So if you were to look at that that skill or disposition of collaboration. And you looked at our common career and technical standards, you looked at our employability skills, you looked at our youth leadership skills, you looked at digital literacy, social emotional learning, global competency, and STEM, you're going to see collaboration show up in all of these different learning priority areas. So they all work together to help students develop those strong collaboration skills that we know employers need. So they're also your employability skills. All right, so we talked about a lot of things that tend to show up in a graduate profile. Who can tell me what's one thing that's almost always missing from a graduate profile? There's a pop quiz time. So I need you to go into the chat. This time we're going to use the chat. So go in there. Andrea, if you wouldn't mind monitoring it for me. Let's see who the lucky winner is. Who is the person that can guess first? What's the one thing that's almost always missing from a graduate profile? I'll give you a hint. We're gathered here this morning to talk about career readiness and academic and career planning.
We have one courageous person who's thought SEL, career goals and interests, empathy, employment experience.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So whoever said career goals and interests, that was the specific thing that I was thinking of and looking at, So those other things may or may not be missing in a portrait of a graduate, and they're all very important. But what I really noticed is I, delved into this world of graduate profiles, and I looked at, let's go back and actually look at them. Oops, there we go. We look at all these examples. What I wasn't really seeing is that sense of students graduating and having identified some career areas of interest and in identifying what their next steps are in getting there. And so that's where I want us to start to think about these portraits of a graduate as a career readiness graduate profile. How can we start to embed the academic and career planning process into that graduate profile? And so for those of you that have used our ACP implementation assessment tool, this should look kind of familiar, right? In the past, we called it an ACP graduate profile. We're really making a transition in Wisconsin to talk more about career readiness as the goal and ACP as the process. So here you're going to see it referred to as a career readiness graduate profile, but it has us thinking through those stages of know, explore, plan, and go, and really thinking about what are those knowledge, skills, and dispositions in each of those stages that need to be a part of your graduate profile. And then when we get to that go part, that's where we definitely find all those typical graduate profile knowledge, skills, and dispositions, right? Because if you want to be ready to be successful in your career, you have to have built those social emotional learning competencies, digital literacy skills, STEM literacy skills, global and intercultural competencies, so that you are an effective communicator, collaborator, critical thinker, et cetera, et cetera. So it's still definitely a big part of that graduate profile. It's just also then adding on, as we think about students knowing themselves and knowing about the world of work, what do we expect them to be able to know, do, or understand by the time they graduate? Same thing with career exploration. What do we want them to have accomplished? What do we expect in terms of a plan? And then, of course, giving them the support and the skills they need to be successful in their plan, along with the academic preparation. You see, we also, as we're doing some updating, we also are adding in some of the bullet points and some of those categories that are reflected in our Education for Employment state statute as requirements, things that should be included in some of these areas as set by state law. All right, so as we round out this first section and I get ready to kind of pass the baton over to Andrea, I want to always stop and bottom line it for you, right? So when we talk about creating a culture of career readiness, we always talk about the first step, creating that career readiness team. But the second step would be to develop or to update, if you already have one, your district's career readiness graduate profile to make sure that that ACP process is reflected in your graduate profile, because that really sets the stage for your school district to look at how ACP and career readiness gets embedded into everything you do. Because once you create that graduate profile, you have to operationalize it. You have to think through what are all the different things that our school districts need to do in order to actualize that vision that we have for our students. So if career readiness is integrated into that graduate profile, that gives you a lever to start to operationalize it and really integrate it into all your classes. All right, I'm going to hand things over to Andrea. She's going to talk to us. We're going to dive in a little bit more deeply right now into social emotional learning. So Andrea, take it away.
Thanks, Karen. So I think integration is probably the word of the day today. And so when we think about what Karen just referenced with the portrait of a graduate, and then thinking about what is this intersection between career readiness, workforce readiness, and social emotional learning, and then fitting within the social emotional learning, a lot of things to unpack. So first, you'll see the definition for social emotional learning, which I'm sure many of you are comfortable with, but just maybe stepping back and thinking about it through the lens of workforce readiness. And when they talk about, acquiring, not only acquiring, but applying these skills of being able to manage your emotions and set and achieve positive goals, to feel and show empathy, establish those positive relationships, and then of course, be able to make responsible decisions. I think any employer would say, like, this is like the dream employee, right? To be able to do those things. And so when we look at it through that frame, it really makes sense that this intersection exists and that this can drive our future work. In fact, CASEL, where we really adopted our social emotional learning definition and competencies from, the Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, is also really digging into this work. And they've created this collaborative states initiative that's focusing on the work of SEL and how it relates to career readiness and career goals, life goals, and SEL being that foundation upon which then you can build out those skills and make sure that you have environments and competencies that allow students to be prepared and to survive and thrive in the workplace. In fact, we are a part of that collaborative. There are 7 states who are involved: Delaware, Kansas, North Dakota, Nevada, Ohio, Pennsylvania, Utah, and Wisconsin. And we meet on a regular basis. We have national sponsors who work with us. We collaborate together in order to move this work forward. So I think of it as, if CASEL is doing this work, it's definitely important and getting us moving in the right direction. And I think Wisconsin is really at the forefront. And so all of the work that all of you are doing is helping move this along as well. Next slide. This here is a framework for social emotional learning in terms of the why, the what, and the how. Again, if we frame it from the perspective of the intersection of workforce readiness and SEL, you'll see how well it connects. So the what we just talked about. And so if we think again of not just social emotional learning, but workforce readiness, we want our students to become employees and in the workforce with ability to have self-awareness, right? Social awareness, positive, relationship skills, that responsible decision making. So it just really coordinates very well. The how part of incorporating social emotional learning into our schools and into our districts, our theory of action, all we need to do is incorporate workforce readiness. And so when we think about building a foundational support and plan, naturally, we can intersect that with workforce readiness. Strengthening adult SEL, change out the word employability strengthen adults' employability skills. And we all have our strengths and we all have areas of growth. And so we also can work on our own social emotional learning skills, which also tend to be employability skills and help us interact in the workforce, as well as helping others interact with us as well. And then that promotion of social emotional learning and workforce readiness, and then reflecting on data. And the thing I love about workforce readiness is there are a lot of indicators and data points that I think can help build up the social emotional learning part of that data piece and that continuous improvement. And then of course the why, and I love the why. I love Simon Simonek. If you're not familiar with him, check him out on TED Talks. And it's really all about the why, right? And so in social emotional learning, they call out specifically college and career readiness in one of their long-term outcomes. In addition to that, when you look at all of the indicators, all of these outcomes, short-term, intermediate, and long-term, every single one of them checks the box related to workforce readiness and employability skills. You know, we all want the people we work with to have positive attitudes and to contribute to a positive climate in the workforce. You know, we want our students who are going to become employees to have those positive social behaviors. We want them to be skilled in the area that they're working, not have conduct problems or AOTA issues or emotional distress. So all of those connect really importantly. The other piece of this are 3 whys that I always like to point out: students, staff, and parents. So for students, we know that at the middle and high school level, they begin to think that social emotional learning is babyish. They've done that, they've been there, they've moved beyond it. And so this really helps to pull social emotional learning into those settings in a way that brings some more excitement and relevance into that work. And helps kids to see it and frame it a little differently, where there's a bit more buy-in from them at those levels. Likewise, for educators, many of us have heard educators who aren't in the pupil services field say, I don't know how to teach social emotional learning. That's not my thing. That's not what I was trained for. And it makes them uncomfortable. They're intimidated by it. When we reframe it in a very natural way to talk about employability skills, I think every educator would say part of their job is preparing students to be, ready for the workforce. And so it becomes more comfortable for them. In fact, there were interviews done with high school staff, and overwhelmingly they said that if social emotional learning was framed within the parameters of employability skills and job readiness skills, that they would be much more comfortable and apt to focus on helping kids build those skills. So we have evidence right from those particular stakeholders. And then of course, parents. Interestingly, there is a U.gov poll that was done in 2021, and parents overwhelmingly were in favor of teaching students skills like having emotional control, making good decisions, and believing in themselves and their abilities. And we know that social emotional learning right now can be somewhat politicized. And what it comes down to is, from this report, parents really want to know what explicit skills their students are being taught. What is the practical application? And employability really helps to define that very, very well. And so it doesn't, parents then are less likely to question, what values are you trying to teach my children, or what is this vague thing that you're trying to accomplish? Because employability is very tuned into, what is the purpose and what are those skills that are needed. And so it really resonates with parents, and they tend to feel very comfortable with that. So a couple more reasons to think about the why. Next slide. So setting up for SEL, I like to again add on and workforce readiness. So just like we would incorporate structures, routines, and lesson plans in order to build SEL, when we incorporate SEL and workforce readiness together, we can do that same thing. The authentic piece that's highlighted there really, I think, is the workforce readiness point, because it brings authenticity to the social emotional learning, because it gives a purpose for that work. It makes it resonate. It provides buy-in. And by doing that, it becomes the authentic piece of SEL, because you can see the bigger picture as well as those parts that work towards it. And then of course, the other part of setting up for SEL is the piece about incorporating it into your classrooms, also into your programs, your agencies, your workplaces, right from day one. And I feel like there are a few reasons I sometimes want to go back into the field, and don't get me wrong, I love my job. But one is because I think about how I would love to take this combination of SEL and workforce readiness and push it into those places that were beyond my day-to-day in the classroom setting. And that would include my work as the dance team advisor, the craft club advisor, the yearbook advisor, and how many times we spent dealing with things that if I was able to have put some structures and practices and even lessons, even if they're micro mini lessons, into that work and into those other settings, how much it would have served students and really helped to push this work ahead. So some things to think about in that regard. All right, next slide. So CASEL has outlined 4 approaches to promoting SEL. They won't be unfamiliar to you. They include freestanding lessons. So looking at what are those explicit teaching skills that we're teaching students. And so, if it's about responsible decision making, what would that look like? And I think we do this a lot through social emotional learning and through some of our academic and career plan lessons as well. But again, trying to find a way to intersect them. So, if you're at the middle school level and you're teaching students about, responsible decision making, you're using examples that also relate to what they're doing in that moment and some scenarios from that, but also maybe from when they're going to be in a workforce setting or in a volunteer setting. And that can help, to make that intersection stronger. And then, of course, general teaching practices is another place where we build those social emotional learning skills, which to me really is similar to what a workforce setting would be like, right? And we're doing things to help students to feel safe and comfortable and things that the teacher can do in order to create that type of an environment. And then, of course, integration of skills instruction. And this would be looking at how are we integrating it? How are we generalizing what we're learning in those freestanding lessons and utilizing that safe environment that has been established within our classrooms and within our school. And it might include reinforcement and modeling and role playing and practice. And then, of course, in those multiple settings so that it can be generalized. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And then lastly, the last approach to promoting SEL is guidance to adult stakeholders. And that would include really looking at it from that systems approach. How do we ensure that we are setting it up right from that foundational level? Are we having a leadership team? Are we doing a needs assessment? And that's a perfect time to pull in that workforce readiness piece. And how can we combine those two things as we build those systems. All right, next slide. So I mentioned the integration examples. So here are a couple. This actually comes from our workforce readiness guide, which we'll also get to in a moment. But modeling, mentoring, role playing, these are a couple places where that integration can happen and where that intersection is really particularly helpful. So not just in a freestanding lesson, but maybe in the midst of that health class, the teacher talks about, okay, so let's work through a scenario where you're getting constructive feedback. And then thinking about where you might get that constructive feedback from. It could be a coach that's relevant to them right now, right? And it could be an employer and it could be a teacher. And let's talk through this. And then helping kids generalize that, right? Because we might talk about a scenario that involves dealing with constructive feedback from a teacher, and they're in this silo and they don't really think about the generalization and how it might also be the same way that they could respond, the same strategies and skills they would use then when they're in an employment situation. And I see this with my own daughter. It's like, I'm trying to connect those dots and it's like, yep, but this. But they sometimes tend to be very linear in their thinking. So these are some great ways that integration can happen between SEL and workforce readiness, as well as integrating it into different systems within your school setting. Next slide. In addition to those integration examples we just mentioned, the reinforcement and the reflection are, two more of those pieces. And again, I always think about that intentionality part of it. So we know that for reinforcement, it's much more effective to be specific rather than to say, good job on collaborating. You want to be very specific in that praise. And this is where that intersection can come in again. So when you're acknowledging a student because they were in a partner situation and thus, they noticed that their partner was really escalating and they stepped away from it, and you come back and you acknowledge them, that's a great time to be very explicit in saying, you know what, I noticed that you could see your partner getting upset and you gave them some space and walked away, even though I know you were anxious about getting this, task completed. And when you came back, you were able to work it out and move ahead. That's a great partner skill, and it's going to serve you when you're, in the workforce as well in similar situations. So making that very explicit, that connection. All right, next slide. I love this slide because I think it really does a beautiful job of laying out this connection. So when we think about the employability skill of collaboration, all of these competencies in social emotional learning relate to that employability school, both in the emotional, self-concept, and social competence domain. And so the title here, SEL is the engine that powers employability skills, it really gives us the how. So if we were just to say to a group, and we've all done this and been there, like, you guys just need to collaborate better. And then you're off to the next group, right, to help them. And they're all like, yeah, what does that mean, right? So this really is a great tool to think about what are those explicit skills that they need in order to collaborate, and being able to pull some of those out and then use them to tailor your conversations around what specifically they might need to be able to do, or even giving them these and saying, okay, which one is it? Where are you falling apart? Where is it that you need to make some growth or, move ahead, and using it to move those conversations. So this can be a really good way of connecting those two. And then again, always being intentional about what does this SEL have to do with workforce readiness and bringing in that component. All right, next slide. So here's an example of our competency crosswalk between our social emotional learning competencies and our employability standards. There's a link you'll see here to the full crosswalk, and I just put it in the chat. So if you want to take a quick peek right now, you can do that as well. And we take all of those employability skills and show where they're connected to each of the SEL competencies. And as you look at it, you can see that the SEL competencies are much more specific, like we talked in the last slide. And so it really does a nice job of breaking down what do those employability standards encompass and look like, and it can help drive that work, that conversation as well. Next slide. So speaking of our guide to SEL and workforce readiness, like I said, I put that link in the chat for you. This is a great resource. A lot of what we talked about today is encompassed in that report. It does a nice job of being a handy dandy guide. It's user friendly. It's an easy read. Now keep in mind you're hearing that from somebody who helped create it, so I might be a little biased, but you can give me some feedback. I can accept constructive feedback. It'll be a good opportunity to practice my social emotional learning skills. But really, Karen has done the bulk of this work and has done an amazing job. So this guide really starts out talking about those definitions, which can be really helpful. And I know all of you have that information, but as we're working with stakeholders who may not be as familiar, it really helps to set that stage. And then of course, the why, which is so important. What is the why about connecting SEL and workforce readiness? And then it does do a really nice job of giving some strategies, some practices, some examples and models along with the crosswalk in this guide as well. And so what I like about this guide is that it gives you that macro systems level, but it also gives you that practical application. And sometimes I feel like I'm reading something and it's all theory and all macro, and I feel disappointed because I don't get the other part of it. And then sometimes I feel like I'm getting all of the, the micro information, but I want to see the bigger picture, especially as I'm working with stakeholders and trying to do some advocacy. And I think this does a really nice job of both. So kudos to you, Karen, for really doing the bulk of this work and putting together this great resource for our stakeholders. And then speaking of resources, here are some resources that just kind of help with the work that we're doing and give you some additional supports. There's the SEL Employability Crosswalk that's just called out right there that you can utilize. It looks like Karen is going rogue and maybe going to show us some of those resources. I have no idea because I can't see my presentation anymore. No, that's okay. It's all good. See, humor. I'm really working on that. All right. So anyway, a variety of really good resources here. Karen, I don't know if you want to call out any of these and share anything specific, that might be helpful to those on the call today.
Yeah, first of all, sorry, I thought I was in a different window and I was going to pull the link where people can find the entire slide deck. So we'll get that link to you later on where I don't throw Andrea off terribly. Oh my goodness. So a lot of the things that we talked about are here on this slide, so Andrea was just talking about that Wisconsin's Guide to SEL and Workforce Readiness. She referenced the SEL and Employability Skills Crosswalk. So you'll have the link to, those full documents. There's also a crosswalk that Zello did that looks at how social emotional learning shows up in Zello. So we provided that crosswalk to you as well. I also found an amazing resource. I believe it's from Advanced CTE about building a strong foundation by incorporating SEL into career and technical education. So give that a look. And then for those of you that are interested in learning more about a portrait of a graduate or a graduate profile, we gave you a website. It's Patel for Kids, and they have really, really great examples of graduate profiles, as well as a how-to guide that takes you step by step through that process.
Perfect. And then Karen, I think I recall hearing from Zello about some kind of additional work they're doing around that SEL piece. Is there anything else you want to share about that? I just thought it was fascinating and it's such a great resource since almost all of our high schools have that.
Yeah. So thank you for bringing that up. So as most of us know, Zello, has some additional add-on features, right? So the state provides that base 6 through 12 platform in Zello, but then you can add on things like method test prep. And so there's a new add-on that's going to be coming soon that really focuses on social emotional learning. So I believe the name is IntelliSpark. But okay, good. So just keep your eyes and ears open for more information about that as Zello rolls that out for next year.
Thanks, Karen. Yeah. And then, of course, we have our bottom line, and you probably could all say this without even having the slide shown up, is just that SEL really does fit in naturally. And it's not about being one more thing. It just requires that intentionality about making sure that that intersection exists, and then getting the stakeholders to buy into that, and to always have that as a focus as you move along. And the other thing I would say too that's not on here is just that it's really by all for all. And I think that's so important that sometimes even with social emotional learning or academic and career planning, it feels like there's this one person, like, right, as a go-to. And I know Karen is really focusing and promoting on that, as well as all of you, that it's that by all for all model, that everybody has to be involved in this process and has a piece to play in it. So, so if you have questions, I wasn't checking the chat, so I saw some things roll in. Don't know if there are any questions.
Yeah, I'll start out with this one. So Chris, thank you so much for your question. And thank you to everyone who in the chat has been popping up with some responses. But just to loop Andrea in, Chris's question was, how do you get teachers who want to teach only their core subject area and never really include career readiness, let alone that ACP process? And we had a lot of great responses. I'll add in a few more things, Andrea, let me know if there's something else that you want to add in. I think, Chris, this is why the first step is building that career readiness team and making sure your career readiness team includes some of those core academic teachers. It doesn't have to include all teachers. Find your early adopters and or your influence leaders, right? So who are the teachers that are more inclined to get excited about, and be open to looking at things from a different perspective. Who are your teachers that, have a lot of respect and other people will listen to? And if you can find some teachers that, both of those, they're both of those things, those are the people you want on your career readiness team. So don't feel like you have to start with everyone. Start with the people that are on board, right? So having that career readiness team and engaging them in that process of identifying what your graduate profile looks like. So they feel ownership of it. So now you've got math, English, science, social studies teacher, world language, art teachers at the table. You're all working together to figure out what does our graduate profile look like. Because now it's not just your plan, that you're saying, here's what we want you to do. It's our plan. Everyone has a vested interest in trying to make that happen. And then you'll start to see your teachers come up with ideas on what they can do to support that graduate profile. Or you're going to find teachers that are like, great, I don't know how to do this. And Chris, you made a really good comment later on about, teachers maybe just not really doing it very well. And so that professional development piece has to be a part of it. So not only do you get that buy-in, but you're giving your teachers the support they need. And that can happen through professional development as well as just collaboration. We're looking, I'm giving away a little bit of a secret, but for next year's career readiness community of practice, we're looking at how can we get, maybe some of your core academic teachers with your CT teachers or your school counselors working together and co-writing some lessons. Another secret that I'm letting out a little bit early, we've got an amazing career readiness in the classroom guide that's coming out that will help show examples of what this looks like. So that's that next step. Once we get that buy-in from the teachers, they understand why this is important, then we need to support them in being able to do it because it's not something that they were necessarily trained to do in their pre-service or teacher preparation programs. So Andrea, anything else you wanted to add?
There's something though, trying to even get a team is actually getting to be very difficult. Because they're so meetinged out.
Yeah.
We were just out meeting on Tuesday about things, and we're talking about we're going to have to meet once a month and all that, and I cannot get teachers to even come to meetings.
Yeah.
It's
Chris,
just hard.
It is. It is. And people have so much on their plate, and so start with the coalition of the willing, but also this is where you
I don't have any willing.
Right. But also
no one who's willing except me.
Yeah, you're a one-woman show. I hear you.
And I don't want to be.
Right. Yeah. And you shouldn't be. So working with your administration to figure out how they can help and break down the barriers, is there an opportunity to, give them some kind of release time from something else to be able to work on this? Is there, summer days that could be utilized to work on this? But you've got to have that administrator. So it's a little bit of a catch-22, but that's where administrator buy-in is really, really important.
We've got that, but there's no carrot to give to the teachers.
So hopefully, so that would be the place that I would start, with your administrator who's on board or administrators and have that discussion about how can we create some carrots, or how can we at least break down the barriers that are holding them back from saying yes. Oh. So keep in touch with us. Let us, and definitely lean on your CISAs. Your CISA ACP coordinator can give you some more in-depth help with this. For right now, I do want to just move us into breakout rooms. So Chris, really, really important barriers and issues to address, and we'll continue to support you on that. We do want to make sure that we give you a chance this morning to really start to practice what you've been learning. And so you heard Andrea talk about, presenting this integration of SEL and, employability skills is not one more thing. So we want to do a little practicing on what does it look like just to embed social emotional learning into something we're familiar with. So that's career readiness for us, right? So we're going to do some practicing here. This is an example of an activity we already did with our DPI career and technical education consultants. So we took some time and wanted to do some practicing. And so we just went through an exercise where we, talked about the scenario of a guest speaker coming in and talking about careers in a class, and just did some brainstorming on what are some of the things that you could just tweak or do a little bit differently before, during, or after to really be intentional about, including and helping draw out some of those SEL skills, or help students develop some of those SEL skills. And so I'm not going to read all of them, but just a couple of the examples that we came up with is, maybe you're going to work with the speaker prior to the presentation and identify some of those SEL/employability skills that are important in their particular business, industry, or job, and have them talk about that with the students. Or maybe afterwards, you're going to gather the students in small groups and have them share out reflections on the presentation, and how, this, talk about maybe is this a possible career that they would want to learn more about, and why, if that's the case. So it's just those tiny little tweaks sometimes. The reinforcement, it's the reflection, it's the calling out, it's the modeling, all the things that Andrea talked about that you can start to incorporate and help your other teachers understand how to incorporate to bring SEL more intentionally into the work that you're already doing. All right, so we're going to get into breakout rooms. And we're going to try this morning to have you go into breakout rooms by your favorite color. So we'll see how that happens. We wanted to do a little mixing and matching, so you have a chance to be in a room, perhaps with school districts from other regions, and learn from each other. So I'll go back to the screen and we'll go into the breakout rooms in just a few minutes. But here's what you're going to do when you're in that breakout room. So your facilitator has the link to a wheel spinner. They're going to pull up this wheel spinner. You are going to spin the wheel and see what academic and career planning activity or career readiness or career-based learning experience that you're going to focus on. So in my example, we came up with writing a resume. And then if for some reason you come up with something where you're like, all right, that really doesn't sound very interesting to us, you can just remove it and you can respin. I give you permission to do that, absolutely. But then you're going to, as a group, brainstorm what are some of the ways that you could intentionally integrate social emotional learning into the activity of writing a resume, either before, during, or after. And your facilitator has a worksheet where they're going to record some of your brainstorming ideas. We've got links to that SEL employability skills crosswalk, so you can reference that as well to kind of jog your memory and help you work as a group to do a little brainstorming. And then the facilitator, will help everyone just kind of identify one idea that you want to share when we come back to large group. So we won't have time to share all your ideas, but pick the one that you're most excited about, and your facilitator will share that with the rest of the group. Don't worry, we also have some really good discussion questions. So, after you do this activity for a little while, feel free to move on to the discussion questions and get into those deeper conversations about how do you actually do this work. All right, so let's go back here. So we're going to break out until 9:45. So we do have a little bit of a shortened time because we're going just a little bit over, but we'll break out in just a minute here. Pick your room by your favorite color. Your facilitator will lead you through the activity using the spinner, doing some brainstorming about how to incorporate SEL into that ACP activity or cable. You'll pick out your favorite, your best idea to share when we come back together. You can have some discussion time. And then when we come back, not only are we going to do that sharing, but we're also going to give you a preview for our professional development that we're looking at, our career readiness professional development for next year. So don't leave. You're going to want to stay for that. Any questions before I open up the breakout rooms? All right. So I'm going to open up the room.